let's slate this, please. Lock it up, please. Lock everything up.
Apple 76, take one. Apple cameras.
Cameras, let me know. Okay, stand by, everyone. Here we go. And background action.
Welcome to the How I Met Your Mother podcast for the episode entitled Last Words. This is the 14th episode of the 6th season and the 127th episode of the series. My name is Alec Lev. Joining us later in the podcast will be Craig Thomas, co-creator, executive producer, and writer of the episode, and Joe Kelly, supervising producer on the show. But first, I was able to speak on set with Jason Siegel, who plays Marshall Erickson. In this episode, the group attends the funeral of Marshall's father. Let's listen to a scene that happens just after Marshall, followed by the gang, leaves the church to get some air. He's learned that the last words his father spoke to him were in a voicemail message.
Thanks a lot, God. Thank you so much. You took my father away from me. The greatest guy that I've ever known. You ripped him off this earth. Way too young. Hey, you know what's awesome? He'll never meet our children, Lily. But we got this voicemail. Thank you so much for the voicemail. This is a great comfort. No, because you know what? Whenever I'm feeling lost or lonely or like maybe even a little cheated because I don't have a father anymore, got the voicemail.
Jason, thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you. I've dreamed about this interview for a long time.
Well, it's finally here. So there have been several weeks over the course of the series that you've been handed scripts where Marshall's gone through some big changes. He got engaged, he got separated, he got back together, the job. This is probably the biggest one. What did you think when they first gave you the story of Marshall's father's death?
I was pretty excited to get such a great acting opportunity, but it doesn't come anywhere close emotionally to the episode where Marshall could not figure out how to go to the bathroom at his office.
You had to dig a little deeper for that one.
That one was much more difficult.
It seems like sitcoms our television is uniquely built for moments like this. In a movie, maybe you get to watch someone for 2 hours before something big happens. We've watched you for 50 hours before this happened. What's it been like to play this character for 6 years? How's it different to play him now than 6 years ago?
Well, it's awesome. You really get to develop a character over a long amount of time, and I think for the audience, for an episode like this, your investment, hopefully, in my character is much more than it would be after an hour. We're 6 years in, you know how much my character loves his father, and I think that'll play into it.
Comedies have always gone this way, from the darker comedies of MASH and All in the Family. In the 80s, you had the sort of family comedies, Family Ties, that would do things like this. But you've got an episode where not only does your father die, but Robin has a magical purse that a million things can come out of it. You straddle sort of the really broad and the really deep at the same time. Is that a challenge?
Not for me. This show is, I think, the perfect tone. It's got elements of drama, elements of comedy, elements of fantasy, and it's just awesome. You know, we're all kind of on the same page. It takes a bit of a page from like a animated series like The Simpsons or things like that, where anything can happen, which happens on our show, but it's live action. So I think that's what separates us.
Now, you are doing double duty these last couple of months here. Can you tell us briefly about your week in the life of Jason right now?
Well, I'm doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm doing days here and nights on The Muppet Movie, which will come out next Thanksgiving. But it's tough to complain because it's my dream come true.
And finally, I asked a similar question to Kyle MacLachlan about Twin Peaks. Quick question about Freaks and Geeks.
Yes.
For the rest of us, this is a show, I know, especially for Craig and Carter, for me, for a lot of people, this is a seminal show in television that did a better job of showing high school than, a painfully better job than maybe anything that's ever been on. For you, is this something you can go back and think of in its place in television history, or is it a job that you did a while ago?
Oh, well, Freaks and Geeks for me is where it all started. That has a special place in my heart. It's where I met Judd Apatow, who's been my mentor. So, no, that's where it all started for me. It's where I learned everything.
Now we'll hear from Craig Thomas and Joe Kelly. Where did this episode come from? Why have you decided to kill off a character?
It's definitely not a decision we undertook lightly. We all know people who've gone through this semi-recently. A couple of our writers lost their dads in the last couple of years and have gone through that as we've been writing this comedy show, and it just occurred to us like that's life. That happens in life, and on a TV show, you get to be with these characters over such a long period of time. It's not 2 hours. It's not a movie. It's not a play. It's years of your life go by, and you mark your life with these characters. I mean, I know that's how I felt growing up watching sitcoms, and just I think that's a real strength that the form, like the artistic form of the sitcom has, that it can be something that you grow and change with. And we just felt like, God, maybe we have earned that. We've gotten to know these characters so well, and it felt like, it felt to us like we could explore that, because that does happen. I mean, How I Met Your Mother is all the different rites of passages that people go through in their lives, and we've seen a lot of them. And that this is one loss that we haven't seen. We haven't done that, so we wanted to go through that with Marshall.
In the writing of it, as you did with, Unfinished, where you told me you kind of went around the room and people talked about things that are not finished in their lives, did you, in a less funny way, go around and get people's input as to what this experience would be like?
I mean, I don't... The people who've gone through it, I don't feel like we didn't force people to talk about really hard things. In
the bigger episodes, you and Carter always seem to get together. I guess now thinking about it now, I think you guys get together about it more, and you come in the room and we brainstorm a little bit less in the room, and because you guys kind of specifically know what you want to do, because it's a big thing. You're not taking it lightly and going, "Oh, what should we do?" We're killing off Marshall's dad. You guys have sat down and talked about it, and I think in the room, because we're used to sharing stories, I think I always kind of sit there and go, "Oh man, did this happen to Craig? Did this happen to Craig?" And I think you kind of play that game with yourself, and this kind of thing we never ask, but you. Sometimes you have specific things. Sometimes we're brainstorming in the room. All this stuff, you guys seem to come in and say, "This is what we're doing," and I think there's always that for us. I think this might have happened to one of you guys, or you've invented this yourselves and you've come up with it and you know what you're doing.
It feels like it was more of like a mission statement of like, how do we do this and do two things? One, not be too glib about it because it's such a serious thing, but two, not be such a bummer that people go, I don't want to turn this comedy show now I don't want to watch this episode of a comedy. And it is, I mean, so our approach, I think the approach we sort of stumbled on that we liked the way into the story was just, I think the very real thing of when you are near someone going through something traumatic, you want nothing more in the world than to be able to be useful to them in some way, and you feel utterly useless because it's too big, right? The thing that happened to them is too big. You can't solve it for them. And so that's why I liked sort of opening the show on like, what do you do? How do you be there for somebody going through this? And that being kind of the way into it. And ultimately, you don't solve anything, but the attempt to be there for them is in the end so appreciated, and that's what they needed. They needed to know that you were there for them.
When a character dies in a movie, for the most part, there's a build-up to it. There's a reason. It's thematically appropriate. It's built into the story. It's a consequence of something. But often on television shows, sometimes it's because an actor really dies. But when you have a character die, it often winds up this way that it's more shocking because it's more like real life. It just kind of happens.
Yeah, because I think with TV, and certainly this speaks to my incredibly lonely adolescence, I certainly felt like the people on Cheers are my friends.
Yeah.
I hang out with them once a week on Thursday night. We have a standing date, and like you do feel like these are people who populate your world. And then on Cheers, Coach dies, and it's like that's what you said. It's that an actor dies, and you have to write to it. But it's shocking. It's staggering. On Sesame Street, Mr. Hooper died. You know what I mean? And you have... spoilers. But I think that was actually just a contract dispute with that actor.
They had him killed.
Too soon.
But it's too soon. But it is. It feels almost akin to real loss. It's sort of closer to actually losing someone in your life than when you just go to a play and meet someone in Act 1 and they die in Act 2. Spoilers.
That's every play.
That's every play. I just spoiled half of plays. I feel like it is shocking, and people did seem pretty shocked by it. I mean, that was certainly one of the ideas behind in the previous episode to this episode, Last Words, the countdown, just to have the feeling of even very subtly in the episode, the feeling of somehow counting down. There's some inevitability in the air. Something is going to happen at the end of this episode. But ultimately, we wanted it to feel pretty shocking because that's how it feels sometimes.
The cool thing about our show with the, I don't know if we can, I think we can say this, stop me if we can, we can always stop. It's a show told in flashback, and even in the episode where he died, there's Marvin Sr. again being funny and being involved, and will continue to be so on the show, which is easy to tell Bill Fagerbakke when you're telling him, you're killing off his character. He's actually got so much better stuff to play than what in this episode and episodes coming up. Like, he's not going anywhere, and the stuff he's in is that much more poignant and cool.
Yeah, I think that's something, like, it doesn't really feel like we're killing that character off, because we are a show where, you know, it's a B horror movie, and no one ever actually really dies. They're always spring back to life just when you thought they were dead. But it does, that is something nice in the How I Met Your Mother universe. It's one giant recollection as told from the future, and we haven't seen the last of Marvin. We certainly haven't seen the last of Marshall processing that loss.
Something I talked to Jason about very quickly was that shows have certainly, obviously, done this. They've gotten very serious, whether it's death or not. The comedies. MASH, All in the Family, sort of more serious shows anyway. But even then, Cheers, and as other shows lost people, Give Me a Break comes to mind. Mm-hmm. But those shows are never as absurd as How I Met Your Mother gets. How I Met Your Mother does move into a realm of absurdist comedy. Robin's Purse, from which anything can pour forth, is not something that would have shown up in MASH.
Right.
And so you are stepping on both sides of an interesting line in this episode, and I think a lot in this season, of much more serious things with not just comedy, but pretty out there comedy back to back. Yeah,
I mean that's something that's a really interesting target to try to find. I think we were trying to find in Last Words, like how can you don't want it to be purely sad. It is still a comedy, but there's something interesting about, you can almost get a little sillier within the context of something tragic, because you need it more. You need laughter more. I mean, I can't count how many people I've talked to who look back on the worst day of their life and remember laughing so hard at some stupid little thing, because you need it. And I think to me it's just that release. I mean, Last Words is definitely, to me, an episode about the catharsis and about Marshall essentially kind of saying goodbye to his dad by trying to get that last recollection right, and ultimately, like, it's a release, and laughter is a release. So I think laughter and tragedy go together.
I remember being in college at a good friend's father's funeral with me and my comedy buddy in the living room, literally, like, almost doing stand-up, and it was a mixture of, like, just getting huge laughs and then stopping. We assholes? No, I think they do this. And, like, it was continually, like, getting laughs, not, like, going for it, but, like, I think as people who grew up to be comedy writers kind of went through a bunch of funerals, like, laughing or finding stuff to laugh about. So I think it's very natural to, in an episode about a funeral, to seek out and go for.
Yeah, I mean,
the
Chuckles the Clown being one of the all-time examples of that, and Mary Tyler Moore, and just like, there is something about needing that release that I think it's okay to actually have silly elements in that story, and maybe even necessary.
I actually went back to the script to look for, structurally, how did you do it? How did you move us from the most serious moment of your series, basically so far at the end of last episode, and very quickly you have them say, Ted says he tries to help out. Sometimes life is like an ocean. Then he kind of gets lost in a bunch of gibberish. And there's your first joke.
Except we cut it out of the episode.
After that.
But that's interesting. That's interesting to talk about, right? Because this is the podcast about the episode. We had to cut out so much stuff from this episode. The only other episode I remember being this brutal to get the time out of is the one Girls vs. Suits with the musical number. And it was the same phenomenon. It was 2 episodes, Last Words and Girls vs. Suits, where in Act 3 you couldn't touch a thing. Because you're not going to touch the musical number that you paid $300,000 to shoot, and you're not going to touch Marshall yelling at God and going through this catharsis and working out this issue and just needing to sort of scream at the heavens for a minute, because that's what he needed to do. And Jason was so amazing in that scene. You sort of know you're not going to touch that stuff. So you're like, all right, Act 1 and 2, somehow we need to get, in this case, it was 5 minutes and 30 seconds out of essentially like 2 acts, which is very similar to what it was in Girls vs. Suits. And, these shows are 21 minutes-ish, so maybe not even once you minus out sort of the main titles and stuff. And, boy, it's hard to get 5.5 minutes out of 2 acts that are, that end up having to be something, like in the teens of minutes. So you're almost cutting out a third of the content. And yeah, there was this fun joke of Ted trying to, at the start of the show in the script that got cut out, of Ted trying to say the right thing to Marshall and just trying to come up with something deep and profound and just absolutely shitting the bed on it. And it was fun and it felt real, because it's like that's what it is. You just don't know what to say to that person. But ultimately we needed to start the story, to get to the story sooner, and we just sort of took this machete to like several pages of material that we really liked and that played well, and that if we'd had more time I would have kept it in. But it was tough. Ultimately I think the episode got much better from cutting that stuff. Even though that stuff was great, it just, there was something about needing the momentum to get to when Marshall is trying to recreate his last memories with his dad and capture those, and like getting to sort of the momentum of the story sooner turned out to be better, even though the jokes were pretty good that we cut.
What I like about television, the cool thing about television and the struggle, I sit through a 2.5-hour movie that's a little lazy and slow in places. Did they have to sit here and solve the puzzle of how do we do this in this amount of time? And sometimes you lose great stuff. And apologies to Danny Strong, who was in the episode a lot more, and just you just had to hone in on a laser sharp focus. What does this story need, and hit those spots. And you do that every week. And I think ultimately you kind of stay on target to what story you're telling.
Yeah, we loved Danny Strong in this episode. There is some really funny, great Danny Strong stuff on our editing room floor that had nothing to do with Danny Strong, who's a great actor. But we just needed to slice out anything not absolutely crucial in those first 2 acts, because you weren't really going to hack up the 3rd act. So that was it's tough. You're watching some stuff go that you really liked, and you're like, boy, that actor's good, that joke was pretty good, and it is definitely the perils of the tell a story in 20 minutes conundrum.
There's another line in it where Ted and Barney say, someone says Judy duty, Lily says Judy duty, and it makes them laugh, and Robin's response to them laughing is, seriously, at a funeral?
Yeah.
And I felt like that's a sort of nice central piece of this thing. Yep, seriously, at a funeral, we're still gonna be funny.
Yeah, we're still gonna be idiots. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's also very much a guy thing. Like, you kind of revert back when one of your friends goes through something, like, you're just like, what story about accidentally shitting my pants can I tell him? What story can I tell about the boobies, or like what? You really do sort of like reach for the very like visceral caveman like response, I think, as a guy sometimes. And the sad thing is, it works sometimes. It can actually make that person laugh. And ultimately, there's another scene that got cut out with Danny Strong in the end of this episode, where Ted winds up kneeing Danny Strong in the nuts right in front of Marshall. And that is the thing at the end of the story that makes Marshall finally laugh. That had to get cut out of the episode because we were just
you are
far too
over
long.
If you're taking out.
But you really need time when you're cutting a priest getting kicked in the nuts. That is violating comedy rules number 1 through 63. But you just need the time. It's weird. It actually makes editing easier in a way, because it's like not even a debate once you're 5.5 minutes over, because you need those emotional moments to breathe. It's just like we could sit here and debate this, or we could just admit we're hacking this out, and you just do it, and it's just like ripping off a Band-Aid. You just have to do it.
And how long ultimately is Marshall's speech? 'Cause I remember watching him film it and thinking, it's rare in a sitcom you're getting 3 minutes or so, 2 or 3 minutes without a joke.
We pulled it together a little bit just because we needed the time. But we tried not to touch it too much because Jason did such a beautiful job, and it was people who work on the crew were crying, and you looked around and people were really moved by it. It was really emotional, visceral scene. So we really didn't want to touch that. We didn't touch that too much. But it's probably a How I Met Your Mother record for longest time without a joke. So I hope everyone enjoyed that.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this week's podcast. Remember to watch How I Met Your Mother on CBS Monday nights and every day in syndication. Check your local listings. Learn more and watch exclusive clips at cbs.com. Find us on Facebook, on both the How I Met Your Mother page and the Robin Sparkles fan page, and follow us on Twitter at himium_CBS, himiumprod, himium_writers, and Bros Life. My name is Alec Lev, and thanks for listening.